Marcus Taylor had heard a lot of things growing up: sirens, gunshots, the late-night arguments outside the apartment walls, but nothing had ever hit him harder than the words she spoke that morning. "You'll never succeed, Marcus." It was said quietly, not shouted. That made it worse. The classroom fell silent. The tick of the overhead clock grew louder in the stillness. Marcus stood next to the whiteboard, chalk dust on his fingertips, staring at the math problem he couldn't solve. He turned slowly toward his teacher, Mrs. Brooks, whose face bore no anger, just disappointment, maybe even resignation. She crossed her arms. "Not everyone's cut out for this," she added, voice cool, almost clinical. "There's nothing wrong with being average." A few students chuckled under their breath. Someone near the back whispered something Marcus didn't catch, but the laughter that followed told him it wasn't kind. He wanted to speak. To explain. To tell her that he had studied, that he'd been working on that equation for 3 nights straight. That it wasn't about the grade, it was about the challenge, the thrill of chasing a solution. But his throat tightened, and the words didn't come. He dropped the chalk, walked back to his seat, and stared down at his hands. They felt small somehow, like they no longer belonged to someone who believed he could do anything worthwhile. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? 2 seats over, his best friend Jamal leaned toward him and whispered, "She had no right to say that, man." Marcus didn't answer. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He was stunned. It wasn't just that Mrs. Brooks didn't believe in him, it was how easily she'd said it. Like she'd been waiting for this moment, waiting to finally speak aloud the judgment she'd silently passed since the first day he walked into her class wearing a second-hand hoodie and worn-out sneakers. She always smiled at the honor roll kids. She nodded approvingly at students who came from good homes. But with Marcus? It was as if she saw him as a cautionary tale already written. That night, Marcus sat on the fire escape outside his apartment, notebook in hand, the unsolved equation still scribbled on the page, a nonlinear differential equation, college level, maybe beyond. She'd said it was extra credit, but to Marcus, it felt like a test. Not of math. Of worth. The Detroit air was cold. Winter had started creeping in early that year. Below, someone shouted into the dark, a dog barked, and a muffled bass line pulsed from a passing car. None of it mattered. Marcus stared at the numbers. He flipped the page. Started again. The next morning, he didn't speak to anyone. At school, he avoided eye contact with Mrs. Brooks and stayed quiet through the lesson. When the bell rang, he stayed behind. She looked up from her desk. Yes. Marcus walked to the front and placed his notebook on her desk. "I solved it." She didn't touch the notebook. "You didn't have to bring it in," she said, her tone dismissive. "It wasn't a requirement." "I just thought you might want to see it," Marcus replied, voice tight. Mrs. Brooks sighed, then opened the notebook and scanned the pages. Her brow furrowed. She read further. Then she flipped back to the beginning. "This isn't correct," she said finally. "You didn't even check the logic," Marcus said. "You just..." "Marcus," she cut him off. "Advanced math isn't about guessing until something sticks. This might pass in some classrooms, but here, we aim for accuracy, not attitude." He picked up the notebook slowly and walked away, but this time something inside him had shifted. The sadness was still there, but it had found company, anger. After school, Marcus went to the one place where he always felt like he mattered, the storage room behind the library, where Mr. Harris, the school's retired science teacher, tutored kids who needed a second chance. "You look like someone who got told the truth and didn't like it," Mr. Harris said, handing Marcus a sandwich. "She said I'll never succeed." Mr. Harris paused. "Mrs. Brooks?" Marcus nodded. "I've seen her cut people down before," Harris said, chewing slowly. But you're one of the brightest minds I've seen come through this school in 20 years. She doesn't see that. Then prove her wrong. I tried. She won't even read my solution. Mr. Harris leaned forward. Show it to me. Marcus opened the notebook and walked Harris through each line, each variable, function, and transformation. When he finished, the old man sat back in silence for a long moment. Then he smiled. Well damn, Marcus, he said softly. You might be onto something. The next day, Marcus returned to class, notebook tucked into his bag like a secret weapon. He didn't care anymore whether she believed him. He'd found someone who did. And that was enough to keep him going. But Mrs. Brooks had another plan. As he walked through the door, she said, Class, we'll be doing a pop quiz today. Those who didn't do the extra credit might struggle. Her eyes flicked to Marcus. Or maybe some already have. Marcus sat down slowly. Jamal looked over, frowning. Don't let her get in your head, he muttered. Too late. Except, maybe not. The quiz was tough. Marcus moved through it fast. Faster than he expected. The solutions came easily, like doors finally unlocking. At the end of class, he handed it in without a word. As he left the room, Mrs. Brooks said, loud enough for others to hear, Marcus, if you spent more time studying and less time pretending to be clever, you might actually pass this year. He didn't turn around. He didn't have to. He had his answer. That night, back on the fire escape, Marcus sat with a flashlight and a brand new problem he'd found online. It was part of a long unsolved set of equations from a university think tank. Something no high schooler had any business trying to solve. But he didn't care. Because Mrs. Brooks had lit a fire in him. She just didn't know it yet. The Taylor apartment was on the 4th floor of a weather-worn building just off Linwood Avenue, in a part of Detroit that maps rarely highlighted. Cracked sidewalks, corner stores with flickering neon lights, and the distant hum of traffic were constant companions. The elevator hadn't worked in years, so Marcus climbed the stairs each day, a quiet metaphor for his life, uphill, slow, and largely unnoticed. Inside, the 2-bedroom unit was cramped but clean. His mother, Denise, worked 2 jobs, nights at a nursing home and mornings at a diner. She was tough, sharp-tongued, and loved Marcus more than anything in the world. Every night before heading to her shift, she left him a handwritten note, even if it was just a line or 2. Don't let nobody tell you who you are, baby. You already know. Mama. He kept them in a shoebox beneath his bed, like a private library of armor. Tonight, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, a faded math textbook open in front of him. The bulb above flickered every few minutes, another thing on the long list his mom couldn't afford to fix yet. A pot of spaghetti simmered on the stove, and the smell filled the apartment, warm and familiar. Marcus, did you eat yet? His little sister, Kiera, called from the bedroom. Almost done, he replied, eyes still on the page. Kiera was 10, bright, endlessly curious, and already asking him about algebra. She adored Marcus like a superhero in hand-me-down jeans. You helping with homework again? She asked, poking her head out. He smiled. You got questions? She grinned and ran to get her notebook. An hour later, with Kiera tucked in and the dishes rinsed, Marcus returned to his books. He wasn't just studying anymore, he was chasing something bigger. That equation from Mrs. Brooks's board had led him into a deeper world. He'd started researching advanced math problems, ones that most students never even saw. It was like falling into a maze where the walls shifted and the rules bent, but he loved it. Still, doubt hung around like an unwanted guest. He heard her voice again. You'll never succeed. What did that even mean? That he'd never be a doctor. An engineer? That he'd never leave this neighborhood? Was that what success meant to her, escaping? He glanced at the shoebox under his bed and pulled out one of the notes. The world don't give you nothing, baby. But you give it hell anyway. He read it 3 times. At school the next day, Marcus arrived early and sat in the back of the library. He had 2 hours before first period. Most kids used this time to talk or scroll through their phones. Marcus used it to dig. To build. To climb. He was reading about the Clay Mathematics Institute's 7 Millennium Prize problems, only one of which had ever been solved. These were the Everest of math. No million-dollar prizes were being handed out to Detroit high school kids, but the beauty of math? It didn't care who you were or where you came from. The numbers didn't know your zip code. That morning, he started working on a related conjecture from a math forum, something deep in abstract algebra. He didn't fully understand it yet, but that didn't stop him. Every line he decoded felt like a step towards something no one could take from him. During lunch, Marcus sat alone under the stairwell, his usual spot. He liked the quiet, the shade, the echo of passing footsteps above. He scribbled notes on a folded napkin, solving equations with the same focus other kids reserved for TikToks. You skipping lunch again? Jamal appeared out of nowhere, a juice box in one hand and a sandwich in the other. Marcus shrugged. Wasn't really hungry. Jamal tossed him half the sandwich. You always say that. Still doesn't make it true. Marcus took it, mumbled a thanks, and kept writing. You good though? Jamal asked. Marcus paused. You ever feel like you're carrying something no one can see? Yeah, Jamal said. But I figure that's most of us. They sat in silence for a moment before Jamal added, you should show someone that math you're doing. For real. That's college-level stuff. I did. She shut it down. Jamal made a face. Brooks? Marcus nodded. Forget her. That woman's allergic to hope. They both laughed quietly, and for the first time that day, Marcus felt the pressure lift just a little. That night, Mr. Harris met him again in the tutoring room. The old man wore a tweed jacket even though the room was stuffy and warm, and he sipped tea from a mug that read, Science is just organized curiosity. Marcus dropped his notebook on the table. I kept going. Mr. Harris adjusted his glasses, peered at the new equations, and let out a low whistle. You've been busy. I think this part here leads somewhere. Like, a pattern. You may be right, Harris said. But this level of abstraction, it's rare for someone your age. Most people wouldn't even recognize the direction you're taking this. Doesn't matter if nobody sees it. Yes, it does, Harris said, firmly now. Because ideas like these, they deserve sunlight. You can't grow anything in the dark. He tapped Marcus's notebook. You ever think about college? Can't afford it. There are scholarships. Programs. Hell, I've seen kids with half your brainpower get full rides just because they had someone in their corner. Marcus stayed quiet. Well, Harris added, you've got someone now. On his way home that night, Marcus walked slower than usual. He passed the closed storefronts, the graffiti-tagged bus stops, the boarded-up rec center where he used to shoot hoops. But something felt different. Not the neighborhood, but him. Like he was walking towards something instead of just through it. The wind kicked up, tugging at his hoodie. He pulled it tighter and kept going. He didn't know where this path would end. He didn't have a roadmap. But for the first time, he wasn't just surviving. He was solving. Evelyn Brooks didn't used to be this way. There was a time when she believed in transformation, when she thought the right question, the right teacher, and the right moment could flip a struggling student's world on its head. That was before the world flipped hers. Now, her mornings began not with hope, but routine. Coffee with 2 shots of espresso, black. NPR humming in the background. A silent drive in her gray sedan to the same high school she'd taught at for 17 years. The same parking spot. The same cracked sidewalk. The same faces, older each year, both hers and theirs. But behind the tightly wound bun, the button-up cardigans, and the hardened eyes, there was a grief no one spoke of anymore. It had been 8 years since her son, Ethan, was killed. He was 15. Smart, curious, a little awkward in a way that felt sweet to her and embarrassing to him. He had wanted to be an engineer, maybe robotics. He built things with his hands. Machines, models, little devices that beeped or spun or clicked. The night it happened, he'd gone to a friend's house for a project. They never made it to the second hour. A fight broke out down the street. Gunshots followed. Ethan had been standing in the wrong place at the wrong time, with the wrong skin, in the wrong neighborhood. No arrests. No leads. Just a closed casket and a lifetime of unanswered questions. After the funeral, Evelyn changed. She kept teaching, but she stopped believing. Her patience ran thin. Her tolerance for classroom disruption became non-existent. But more than that, more than the silence and the short temper, was the wall she built. Especially with boys like Marcus. There was something in his eyes that reminded her of Ethan. Not in the details, but in the hunger, the twitching mind, always working, always reaching. And it scared her. Because believing in someone again meant risking that loss again. So she didn't. That morning, she sat at her desk reviewing quizzes. Her red pen worked fast, efficient, cold. She wasn't cruel, but she was firm. She believed life was a numbers game, effort in, results out. But Marcus, he challenged that formula. She'd seen him in class, half attentive, half distracted, doodling in the margins, whispering to Jamal. He rarely raised his hand. When he did, it was often to push back on something, a method, a formula, a step she'd written out. It felt less like engagement and more like defiance. But then came the equation. The one she wrote on the board as extra credit, a challenge no one would solve. And Marcus had tried. She didn't tell anyone this, but when she first read through his solution, something inside her shifted, just briefly. A hesitation. It was creative. It wasn't standard. It wasn't perfect. But it wasn't guesswork either. Still, she dismissed it. She told herself it was for his own good. Better he learn now that effort wasn't always enough. That talent without structure was chaos. And yet, something about his persistence unnerved her. Later that day, she found herself staring at his notebook again. It had been left on her desk, forgotten or intentional, she wasn't sure. She flipped it open. The equations were bold, messy, layered in pencil and erasure marks. But they weren't random. He was working through a path of reasoning that most of her students wouldn't even consider. She didn't want to be impressed. But she was. And that made her angry. In the faculty lounge, she ran into Mr. Harris. Still hiding out in the lab, she asked him, pouring another coffee. Still saving geniuses from being overlooked, he replied with a smirk. She rolled her eyes. Don't start. You know he's good. Raw talent doesn't always translate into results. You mean Marcus, he said, voice steady. The kid who's teaching himself advanced theory from online journals while living in a 2-bedroom apartment with no Wi-Fi. She hesitated. He has potential. No, Evelyn. He has more than that. She didn't respond. Don't let your pain turn into prejudice, he added softly. Her hand froze mid-pour. She returned to her classroom and sat behind her desk, eyes fixed on the chalkboard. Years ago, she used to believe she was building bridges, connecting minds to ideas, kids to their futures. Now, she wasn't sure what she was doing. Policing? Measuring? Containing? Her husband had left 2 years after Ethan's death. Said he couldn't breathe in that house anymore. Couldn't face the empty room or the closed door with the nameplate still taped to it, Ethan's lab. She stayed. The teaching was her routine, her control, her way to keep the world from spiraling out again. But Marcus? He was a variable she didn't account for. That evening, alone in her apartment, Evelyn pulled a dusty binder from the shelf, Ethan's notebook. Inside were sketches, blueprints, half-built equations. The last page had a single line in his small handwriting. Even if nobody gets it yet, keep building. She sat with that line for a long time. The next morning, she entered her classroom before the bell rang. She stood at the board and began writing a new problem. One that was even harder than the last. Something from a research journal she used to admire. Something real. When Marcus walked in, she didn't look at him. But she said loud enough for him to hear, "Let's see who dares to solve this one." The bell rang, signaling the start of another day. Students filed into the classroom, a mixture of excitement, apathy, and barely contained energy. Marcus slid into his usual seat in the back, slipping his backpack off his shoulder, already preparing for what was coming. The day before, Mrs. Brooks had written a new equation on the board, one that was a notch above anything they'd seen before. Marcus had stayed up late last night running through it. He had a gut feeling that this time, this problem, was the one he'd solve. As the class settled, Mrs. Brooks stood at the front, her eyes scanning the room, unreadable. She hadn't looked at him yet, but Marcus could feel the weight of her gaze, as if she was daring him to try again. It didn't matter. He'd try anyway. "All right, everyone," Mrs. Brooks said, her voice steady but with a hint of challenge, "we're doing something different today. Yesterday's equation was just a warm-up, a taste of something bigger. Today, we dive deeper." She turned to the board, her chalk squeaking as she wrote the new equation, long, complex, and almost impossible to comprehend for most of the class. Marcus's heart raced. He wasn't nervous, no, not this time. He was focused. His mind clicked into gear like it always did when he saw something that needed to be solved. This wasn't just a classroom challenge. It was an opportunity, the kind that rarely came along. Mrs. Brooks, in her usual strict tone, addressed the class. "This is an advanced problem, people. Don't expect to get it right away. I'm giving you 10 minutes to work through it. We'll go over it together after. If any of you think you can solve it on your own, feel free to step up." The room grew quiet as pencils scratched against paper, a few students whispering to one another about the difficulty of the problem. Marcus immediately got to work, his mind already moving faster than his hand could keep up. He knew that Mrs. Brooks didn't believe he could do it, and that fueled him even more. As the minutes ticked by, Marcus felt a rising sense of clarity. The solution was there, just within reach. His mind was racing through the formula, following the intricate steps he'd memorized from his late-night study sessions. He hadn't been sleeping much lately, but this, the math, the challenge, this made it worth it. He was almost there when Mrs. Brooks called out, "Time's up." Students reluctantly put down their pencils, some of them exchanging glances, others staring at their half-completed work. Mrs. Brooks walked back to the board, her gaze flicking over the room. "All right, who wants to give it a shot?" she asked, her voice almost mocking. Nobody raised their hand. Not even Jamal, who normally volunteered for everything. But Marcus did. His hand shot up, his eyes locked on the board, ready. Mrs. Brooks hesitated for a moment. She knew Marcus was eager, but she wasn't sure he could do it. There had been no sign from him in class before that he had the skills for such a problem. He was talented, sure, but he never showed it in front of everyone. Never in the way she wanted him to. "Marcus," she said reluctantly, her tone cold, "come on up." Marcus stood, his heart pounding with anticipation. This was it. He walked to the front of the class, chalk in hand, and faced the board. "All right," Mrs. Brooks said, crossing her arms. "Show us what you've got." Marcus took a deep breath and began to work. The steps came naturally to him, each move felt like a part of something larger, a bigger puzzle. His chalk moved across the board, quickly but confidently, solving piece by piece. The class watched in silence, the tension thick in the air. For a moment, everything felt like it was suspended in time. When he finished, he stepped back and turned to face Mrs. Brooks. His heart raced, but his eyes were steady, almost daring her to say something. Mrs. Brooks stared at the board for a long moment. The equation was solved. Every part of it. She blinked, shook her head, and then glanced around the room, trying to mask the shock on her face. "Marcus," she said slowly, her voice strained, "how did you?" But before she could finish, the bell rang, signaling the end of the class. The students scrambled to pack up their things, their whispers and murmurs loud in the otherwise silent room. Mrs. Brooks stood there for a long moment, looking at the problem on the board. As Marcus packed his bag, he couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction. He'd done it. He'd solved the problem that Mrs. Brooks hadn't believed he could. He had shown her, in front of the whole class, that he was more than just a kid who didn't always follow the rules. But even though Marcus felt a sense of triumph, something inside of him was unsettled. Mrs. Brooks hadn't said much after he solved the equation. There was no praise, no acknowledgement. Just that cold silence. Why was she so quiet? The next class started, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between him and Mrs. Brooks. She didn't look at him the same way anymore. And when the students left, she didn't say a word to him. It was as if she was distancing herself, pushing him further away. He didn't understand it. Why did she act like that? Why didn't she just admit he'd done something impressive? He wasn't looking for a medal, but an acknowledgement, a simple, "well done," would have been enough. The next few days were a blur. Mrs. Brooks continued to teach, but her interactions with Marcus were more formal, more distant. She would ask questions in class but wouldn't engage him as she had before. She didn't call on him to share his thoughts or solutions. She didn't offer him extra credit, or even acknowledge his efforts after class. It was like she had shut him out. Marcus tried not to care. He kept his focus on his studies, determined to prove he could succeed despite what anyone said. But it hurt. It hurt to see Mrs. Brooks act like he was invisible, to see that she wasn't giving him the attention he thought he deserved. But there was one thing Marcus knew for sure, he was not going to give up. Not now, not ever. The days that followed Marcus's breakthrough were a mixture of confusion and determination. Despite solving the equation in front of the class, Mrs. Brooks treated him as if it never happened. She didn't speak to him after class, didn't acknowledge his achievement, and didn't even call on him during the next few lessons. It was as if she had erased his success from her mind. Marcus had learned to ignore it. He wasn't going to let her behavior hold him back. His grades were improving, his understanding of advanced concepts growing by the day. He was on the verge of something, he could feel it. But it didn't stop the gnawing feeling that something was off, something between him and his teacher. It wasn't just her coldness, it was something deeper, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. One afternoon, after class had ended and most students had cleared out, Marcus lingered behind. He was packing his bag when he noticed Mrs. Brooks standing near her desk, staring at something in her hands. Her back was to him, and for a moment, he almost turned around to leave. But something made him pause. Maybe it was the way she was clutching the papers in front of her, the way her shoulders were stiff and rigid. She didn't look like herself. She looked like a woman who was fighting with something inside. Marcus hesitated, then walked over slowly. "Ms. Brooks?" he said, his voice quieter than usual. Mrs. Brooks didn't jump or look startled, but her head snapped up as though she had been lost in thought. Her face softened for a split second, but it quickly hardened again. She put the papers down on the desk and crossed her arms. "Marcus," she said, her tone neutral, "what are you still doing here?" I just wanted to talk to you," Marcus said, fidgeting with the strap of his backpack. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been working hard. I mean, I know you probably didn't think I could solve that problem, but I did. I just wanted to, I guess I thought you'd be. He trailed off, unsure of what he was even asking for. It wasn't like him to get emotional about things. But there was something inside him, a quiet frustration that had been building ever since the last class. Why hadn't she said anything? Why hadn't she at least acknowledged it? Mrs. Brooks looked at him, her expression unreadable. You're right. You did solve it. But it's not enough just to solve problems, Marcus. You have to prove you deserve to be here. To be in this class. To be in this world. Marcus blinked, taken aback by the sharpness of her words. He hadn't expected that. He thought she'd at least offer him a word of encouragement, maybe some kind of praise. Instead, he was left with this cold, almost accusatory tone. I don't understand, he said, feeling the frustration creep up in his chest. I'm doing my work. I'm putting in the effort. Why is it never enough for you? Mrs. Brooks didn't respond right away. She stood there, looking at him, her lips pressed tightly together as though she was choosing her words carefully. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer than before, but still with a cold edge. You don't get it, do you? She said. It's not just about solving problems. It's about proving that you belong here. You think that just because you solved one equation, you've earned something. You think that makes you different from the others? Marcus's eyes narrowed. What are you saying? I'm saying, she continued, her voice rising slightly, that you have a lot of potential, Marcus. You do. But potential isn't enough. It's not about just doing the work. It's about being more than what you are. You have to show people, you have to prove it to them. Her voice trailed off as though she was suddenly tired of the conversation. I am more than what I am, Marcus snapped, his voice louder now. I've been showing you. I've been showing everyone. Mrs. Brooks took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly. I know what you're trying to say, Marcus. But sometimes, in this world, people won't see it until you force them to. And the truth is, not everyone will want to see it. Not everyone will want you to succeed. Marcus felt a knot in his stomach. Her words stung, but they also made him feel angry. He wanted to tell her she was wrong. He wanted to scream that he didn't need anyone's approval, that he could succeed without her help or anyone else's. But instead, he stood there, silently staring at her, trying to make sense of what she was saying. Was this some kind of test? Did she want him to beg for her approval? Or was she just trying to push him out? He couldn't tell. But one thing was clear, Mrs. Brooks wasn't the teacher he thought she was. She wasn't the mentor he'd hoped for. She was someone different, someone he didn't understand. I'm sorry, he said, his voice quieter now. I didn't mean to. Mrs. Brooks cut him off. No, Marcus. I'm the one who should be sorry. But you need to understand something. Life isn't just about solving problems. Sometimes it's about learning when to walk away. And with that, she turned and walked to the door, leaving Marcus standing there, alone in the classroom. Later that evening, Marcus sat on his bed, staring at the screen of his phone. He had a million things he could do, a million things he should do. But he didn't feel like doing any of them. Not after what had just happened. He had expected a teacher to guide him, to help him become better. But instead, he felt like he was being pushed down, as if his hard work and dedication didn't matter. He opened up his messages, scrolling through the list of names until he saw one he hadn't expected. It was from Mrs. Brooks. He hesitated for a moment before clicking it open. Mrs. Brooks. I've been thinking about what we talked about today. You were right. You do deserve better, and I didn't handle that conversation well. I'm sorry for that. I've been struggling with my own frustrations, and I took them out on you. That's not fair. I'm going to give you the chance to show what you're capable of. You're not invisible to me, Marcus. You never were. But you have to keep showing up. You have to keep proving it to yourself first. Marcus sat there for a long time, staring at the message, feeling the weight of her words. It wasn't the apology he had expected. It wasn't even the kind of apology he had wanted. But it was something. A shift. Maybe it was the beginning of something he'd been waiting for. The next day, Marcus walked into the classroom with a sense of cautious optimism. The weight of Mrs. Brooks's message still lingered in his mind, but it didn't feel like it had resolved everything. She hadn't promised him anything. There was no guarantee that her words would mean anything in the long run. But there was something different in her tone, something he hadn't heard from her before. She hadn't completely shut him out. As the bell rang and students filtered in, Marcus took his seat, scanning the room. He noticed Mrs. Brooks was already at the front, preparing for the day's lesson. Her posture was rigid, as always, but this time there was an air of anticipation. For the first time in weeks, it didn't feel like she was just going through the motions. When the class settled, she addressed them with a sharpness that Marcus wasn't used to hearing from her. "Today's lesson will be different," she said, her voice clear and firm. "I'm going to give you a challenge, a real challenge. You'll need to work together, think critically, and push yourselves to think beyond the textbook. Some of you might fail. Some of you might struggle. But that's okay. The point is, I want to see you break through the walls that are holding you back." Marcus's ears perked up. A challenge? This was exactly what he'd been waiting for. He had never backed down from a challenge before. And now, Mrs. Brooks was giving him the chance to prove himself once more. She wrote a new equation on the board, this one far more complex than anything they'd done before. It wasn't just a single equation. It was a series of interwoven problems, each building on the last. To solve it, they would have to combine different concepts from across their lessons. It was a test of everything they'd learned up to this point, and then some. "Your time starts now," Mrs. Brooks announced. The students immediately got to work, their pens scratching against paper, their minds trying to grasp the intricacies of the problem in front of them. But Marcus wasn't like the others. While the rest of the class fumbled through the calculations, he took a deep breath, steadying himself. He didn't feel rushed. He didn't feel the pressure of his classmates' eyes on him. For the first time in a long while, he felt focused. This was his moment. He dove into the equation, working through the steps methodically, piece by piece. The numbers started to click into place, each one feeding into the next. His mind raced, thoughts flowing effortlessly. He could feel the solution just ahead of him, like the final piece of a puzzle waiting to be slotted into place. This was where he excelled, when there was a challenge to overcome, when everything was on the line. This was where he thrived. As he worked, he kept glancing up at Mrs. Brooks. She was watching them closely, moving around the room, but her eyes always seemed to fall on him. She didn't say anything, but Marcus could feel the weight of her scrutiny. She was waiting for him to fail. She was waiting for him to falter, to show that he didn't belong here. But he wasn't going to let that happen. He was going to show her that he was more than just a student. He was going to break through, and he was going to do it on his terms. Minutes passed, and Marcus was nearly done. His pen moved quickly as he filled in the final pieces of the puzzle. His hands trembled with anticipation as he wrote the last number on the page. He was done. He looked over his work, double-checking each step. It was perfect. Everything lined up. He had solved the equation. No doubt about it. Marcus sat back in his chair, looking around at the class. Some of the other students were still struggling, their brows furrowed in concentration. But Marcus wasn't worried about them. He had done it. He had proven to himself that he could do it. When the time was up, Mrs. Brooks called the class to attention. "All right, let's see what you've got," she said, her voice clipped. Who wants to share their solution? No one raised their hand at first. There was a moment of silence as the class hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. Finally, Marcus stood up, walking to the front of the room with his paper in hand. His heart beat faster as he approached the board, but he didn't let the nerves show. He knew what he had done. He knew what he was capable of. He turned to Mrs. Brooks, who had an unreadable expression on her face. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't scowling either. It was as though she was waiting for something beyond just the answer. "I think I've got it," Marcus said, his voice steady. He handed her the paper. "Here's my solution." Mrs. Brooks took the paper, scanning it quickly. Marcus watched her face closely, looking for any sign of acknowledgement, any sign that she had seen what he had done. For a long moment, she said nothing. She just stared at the paper, her gaze intense, almost as if she were searching for something. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. "You solved it," she said. "You really did." Marcus couldn't believe it. For the first time, Mrs. Brooks wasn't dismissing him. She wasn't downplaying his success. She was acknowledging it. But then, she surprised him again. "But this is only the beginning," she added. "You've shown me that you can solve problems, that you can think critically. But now, I want to see if you can teach others. If you can help those around you break through their own walls. Can you do that, Marcus?" The question hung in the air, heavier than any equation. Could he? He wasn't sure. But he knew one thing, he wasn't going to let this opportunity slip through his fingers. He was going to rise to the challenge. "Yeah," he said, his voice firm. "I can do that." As the class broke up for the day, Marcus felt a shift. Something had changed. Not just with Mrs. Brooks, but within him as well. He wasn't just solving problems anymore. He was growing. He was evolving. He had made it this far, and he knew that nothing could stop him now. For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The next few weeks passed in a blur of excitement and pressure. Marcus was still riding high from his success in Mrs. Brooks's class. She had given him a challenge, to help others break through their own walls. And though he wasn't entirely sure how he was going to do it, he accepted the challenge without hesitation. It felt like everything had shifted. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just surviving the class. He was excelling. He was thriving. But with this new success came new expectations, and with those expectations came an entirely new set of challenges. The first sign of trouble came when Mrs. Brooks began to notice something unexpected. Other students were beginning to turn to Marcus for help. At first, it was just a few classmates who had been struggling with the complex equations. They'd sit with him after class or in study groups, asking him to explain the concepts in a way that made sense. And Marcus, eager to prove his worth, happily obliged. It felt good to be the one helping others. It felt even better when those students started improving, their grades slowly climbing as they followed his advice. But soon, it wasn't just a handful of students. It was a wave. More and more of his peers were coming to him for guidance, their faces a mixture of desperation and hope. They saw what he had done, what he was capable of, and they wanted in on it. Marcus didn't mind at first. He was still hungry to prove himself, still thrilled by the idea that his hard work was paying off. But slowly, it began to take its toll. Every day after school, Marcus found himself staying later and later, tutoring classmates until the sun had set, his energy drained by the effort. It was a double-edged sword. While his classmates were improving, Marcus was burning out. The exhaustion was starting to show. His grades, though still good, weren't improving at the same pace. His focus in class began to wane as he tried to juggle helping others and keeping up with his own work. He had always been a hard worker, but now he was stretched too thin, struggling to balance everything. And the pressure? It was relentless. Mrs. Brooks noticed the change. One day, after class, she asked him to stay behind. Her eyes, which had once seemed so distant, were now filled with concern. "Marcus," she said, her voice gentler than usual, "I see what you're doing. You've been helping a lot of the students, haven't you?" Marcus nodded, his fingers drumming nervously on his desk. "Yeah, I guess so. They've been struggling, and I can help them. I want them to get it, you know. I want them to succeed." "I understand," she said, her gaze thoughtful. "But I think you're spreading yourself too thin. You're helping everyone else, but you're not helping yourself." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He had known something was off, but hearing it from Mrs. Brooks made the truth hit him like a ton of bricks. He had been so focused on proving himself to others, on showing everyone that he belonged, that he had neglected his own needs. He had forgotten what it was like to be the student, to focus on his own work. "I'm fine," Marcus said, though his voice didn't sound convincing even to him. "No, Marcus," Mrs. Brooks replied, her tone firm but not unkind. "You're not fine. You're doing amazing things, but you're wearing yourself out. You need to take care of yourself. You need to find balance." For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt vulnerable. He had been so caught up in his newfound role as the helper, the one who had figured it out, that he had lost sight of the fact that he was still a student. And being a student meant that he had to continue learning, too. He couldn't do it all on his own. He had to learn how to ask for help, how to let go of some of the burden. But even as the reality of his situation set in, a new sense of determination filled him. He wasn't going to let this setback define him. He wasn't going to burn out. He would figure it out. He had to. "I'll try," Marcus said, his voice quieter this time. "I don't want to let anyone down." "You won't," Mrs. Brooks assured him. "But you need to remember something. Success is not just about doing everything yourself. It's about knowing when to ask for help, when to delegate, when to step back and take care of your own well-being. You're not in this alone, Marcus." Her words hit home. Marcus had been so focused on proving to others that he could do it that he had ignored the reality that no one succeeds alone. Everyone needs support, even the most driven individuals. That night, as he sat in his room, Marcus thought about what Mrs. Brooks had said. He had been so eager to help his classmates, to show them that they could rise above their struggles, but in doing so, he had neglected his own struggles. And now, he was feeling the weight of it. The next day, Marcus took a step back. He decided to limit how much time he spent tutoring others. It wasn't easy. He still wanted to help, but he realized that he had to put his own education first. He couldn't keep giving everything to others if he didn't have enough left for himself. He talked to some of the students who had been coming to him for help, explaining that he needed to focus more on his own work for a while. They were disappointed, but they understood. They had seen how hard he had been working, and they respected his decision. It was a hard thing to do, but it was the right thing. As the days passed, Marcus found a new rhythm. He still helped others when he could, but he no longer let it consume him. His grades improved once again, and he felt more in control. He was starting to see that success didn't just mean achieving results. It meant knowing how to balance the demands of life, to recognize when he needed help, and to be kind to himself when things got overwhelming. Mrs. Brooks noticed the change, too. The next time they spoke after class, she gave him a small but approving smile. "You're getting it, Marcus," she said. "You're learning how to thrive, not just survive. And that's the key." Marcus smiled back, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. He wasn't there yet, but he was getting closer. The morning sun poured through the windows of the classroom, casting a warm glow over the students gathered in their seats. It was a typical Wednesday, except for the palpable tension in the air. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. He had been in Mrs. Brooks's class long enough to know when a storm was brewing, and today felt like one of those days. The clock on the wall ticked away steadily, but time seemed to drag on. Marcus had barely settled into his seat when Mrs. Brooks walked in, her usual brisk pace replaced by a certain gravity in her steps. There was an unusual seriousness to her expression, her eyes scanning the room before she addressed the class. "Today's lesson will be different," she said, her voice low but commanding. "We've spent the last few weeks tackling equations, problem solving, and thinking critically. But now, I'm going to give you something that's going to test everything you've learned." A wave of murmurings rippled through the class. The last time Mrs. Brooks had spoken like this was when she had introduced the complex series of equations, a challenge that had caught everyone off guard. This time, however, there was something in her voice that told Marcus this wouldn't just be about equations. This would be about something bigger. "The test is not just about solving problems on paper," she continued. "It's about how you approach problems in life, how you handle adversity and uncertainty. It's about resilience. I'm going to give you a scenario, and you'll have to find a way to solve it. Think creatively. Think differently." Marcus's heart rate quickened. This was it. Mrs. Brooks wasn't just going to challenge them with math, she was challenging their ability to adapt, to think on their feet. It was more than just numbers now, it was about problem solving in real life. "Here's your challenge," she said, writing a new set of instructions on the board. "You are stranded in a remote area, with limited resources. You have to find a way to survive, communicate with the outside world, and ultimately escape. The catch is, you have no prior knowledge of the environment. The resources are minimal, and you'll need to rely on your ingenuity." The room fell silent. Marcus could feel his pulse quicken. It sounded like a survival situation, like something out of a documentary. He'd never done anything like this before. What did Mrs. Brooks want from them? Was this some kind of psychological test? What would they be judged on? Mrs. Brooks continued, "The key to this challenge is to think strategically. You don't need to have all the answers right away. You need to think about how you'd prioritize your actions. Who would you work with? How would you approach a lack of resources? How would you stay calm under pressure?" As the scenario began to sink in, Marcus couldn't help but think about the last few months of his life. He had been in a constant state of survival, struggling to keep up with school, with his responsibilities, with his own doubts. And now, Mrs. Brooks had just handed him a metaphorical mirror. The test wasn't just about solving problems on paper. It was about solving the problems of his life, about learning how to rise above obstacles, even when everything felt stacked against him. He looked around the room at his classmates. Some were already scribbling down notes, trying to map out plans, while others seemed paralyzed by the ambiguity of the scenario. No one seemed confident, and Marcus could understand why. This wasn't something they could prepare for. There was no formula, no equation to solve. It was a test of resourcefulness, creativity, and, above all, resilience. For the next few hours, the class worked in silence, each student writing their response, trying to piece together the puzzle of the challenge. Marcus found himself fully immersed in the task. It was almost like a game, a puzzle with no easy answer. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how applicable it was to his own life. How many times had he felt like he was stranded, with limited options and no clear way out? The test, in a way, mirrored his own experience. He had struggled with doubts about his abilities, struggled to overcome the obstacles placed before him, but he had never given up. He had always found a way forward, even when it seemed impossible. His pen moved furiously as he wrote down a plan. He focused first on survival, prioritizing the basic needs, shelter, water, food, and warmth. Then, he moved on to the idea of communication, of reaching out for help. In the scenario, there was no GPS, no cell phone service. But he knew that finding a way to communicate, to signal for help, would be essential. As Marcus wrote, he began to feel a sense of clarity. The steps he took in the exercise mirrored the steps he had taken in his own life. Resilience, creativity, and resourcefulness had always been the tools he had used to navigate the challenges that life had thrown his way. When the bell rang, signaling the end of class, Mrs. Brooks stood at the front of the room, watching as the students packed up their things. "All right, everyone," she said, her voice calm yet firm. "Now that we've finished, I want to hear your responses. But more than that, I want to hear how you arrived at your solutions. Tell me what strategies you used, how you handled the uncertainty. This is not just about getting the right answer. It's about the journey, the process." One by one, students shared their plans, some with more confidence than others. But when it was Marcus's turn, he felt a sense of determination that had been building up for weeks. "I approached it like a survival situation," he began, his voice steady. "When things are uncertain, you have to prioritize. First, survival, basic needs like water and shelter. Then, communication. I know it's hard to contact the outside world in an unknown place, but you'd need to find a way. Maybe you could make a signal, build a fire, or even use the stars to navigate. But it's not just about survival, it's about adapting and finding ways to use what you've got. And if you don't have everything you need, you have to make do with what's available." Mrs. Brooks nodded thoughtfully as Marcus spoke. The class had grown quiet, listening closely to his words. He wasn't just talking about the test. He was talking about life. The way he had been living it. And the way he had learned to survive and thrive. "You've got it," Mrs. Brooks said after a moment of silence. "This is exactly the kind of thinking I've been trying to cultivate in this class. It's about using what you've got and finding a way forward, no matter what." As the class ended and Marcus walked out of the room, he felt a sense of pride. He had just completed the hardest test he'd ever faced, not because it was about equations or numbers, but because it had forced him to face his own limitations and break through them. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. The days following the survival test were quieter. Mrs. Brooks had handed back the papers, and while most of the students had struggled with the open-ended nature of the challenge, Marcus's approach had stood out. He had managed to piece together a logical, well-thought-out plan that didn't just survive the hypothetical scenario, but worked to solve it, just like he had been trying to do in his own life. Despite the praise, though, Marcus didn't feel like he was out of the woods just yet. It was like the hard work of excelling in the classroom wasn't enough anymore. It wasn't that he had solved the big problem of his life. He still felt the weight of the outside world, expectations, responsibilities, and the anxiety that came with being the first in his family to attempt something as big as going to college. Every day, he woke up with this quiet pressure gnawing at him, reminding him that the journey wasn't going to get any easier. But there was something different now. Every time Marcus felt that pressure, he thought back to the challenge Mrs. Brooks had given them. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about finding solutions, adapting, and being willing to change your approach when things didn't go as planned. And most importantly, it was about resilience. Marcus was learning how to bounce back, no matter how hard things seemed. He still had doubts. He still sometimes wondered if he was truly capable of everything he wanted to achieve. But every step he took, every decision he made, moved him closer to his goal. And that felt like progress. The next challenge came in a way Marcus hadn't expected. It wasn't in the form of a test, an exam, or even a surprise lesson from Mrs. Brooks. No, this challenge came from a place he hadn't anticipated, the other students. It wasn't that they were rude or outright hostile. But the shift in the classroom dynamics was hard to ignore. The attention he had earned for his problem-solving skills, his rising success, it had made him a target. It started with small things, quiet snickers as he passed by groups of students, sideways glances when he offered help to others. At first, Marcus didn't think much of it. People could be cruel sometimes, but that was just high school. It was the kind of thing that happened when someone moved ahead of the pack, when they started standing out. He didn't care much for the drama. He had bigger things to focus on. But then, the comments started. Little jabs that seemed to appear out of nowhere. You think you're better than us now, huh, Marcus, one person would say. Another would chime in, just because Mrs. Brooks likes you doesn't mean you're special. You're just lucky. The word stung. It wasn't that he hadn't heard these kinds of things before. He was used to the idea that success could make people uncomfortable. But this felt different. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the attention and the label they were attaching to him. Marcus wasn't sure what hurt more, the words themselves or the feeling that they were starting to define who he was in the eyes of his classmates. At first, Marcus tried to ignore it. He kept his head down, stayed focused on his work, and kept doing what he had been doing. But it didn't stop. And with each comment, each whisper, Marcus felt the walls closing in. It was like he was being suffocated by something he couldn't see but could feel with every fiber of his being. One day, after a particularly harsh remark from a group of students, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in months: doubt. Deep, gnawing doubt. The kind that made him question everything. His self-worth. His intelligence. His place in that classroom. He thought about the journey he had come from, his past, his struggles, the weight of carrying his future on his shoulders. All of a sudden, it felt too heavy. Too much. He didn't talk to anyone about it. Not at first. He didn't want to show weakness. He was supposed to be strong. But the strain was building up. And it wasn't just the whispers and comments, it was the pressure that came with the new expectations. It was the unspoken rule that once you showed you could excel, you had to keep excelling, always be the best. And when you failed, even slightly, it was like you didn't belong anymore. After class, Marcus slipped out of the room, his mind swirling with frustration. His usual route to his locker felt like a maze. He wanted to just disappear, to not be seen. He needed a moment alone. His feet led him outside to the courtyard, a small patch of grass surrounded by trees. It was quiet there. No whispers. No stares. Just the wind rustling the leaves and the distant hum of cars passing by. Marcus sat down on one of the benches, his thoughts racing. What was he supposed to do now? A few minutes passed, and Marcus didn't realize he wasn't alone. He jumped when he heard a voice behind him. Hey! It was Jason, one of the few people Marcus had begun to feel comfortable around. Jason wasn't a part of the popular crowd, and he had always treated Marcus with respect, never giving in to the gossip or the rumors. Hey, Jason, Marcus said, trying to mask the exhaustion in his voice. You okay? Jason asked, sitting down beside him. I noticed you've been a little off lately. Marcus wasn't sure why, but he found himself opening up. Maybe it was because Jason was one of the few people who hadn't turned on him. Maybe it was because he couldn't carry the weight anymore. I don't know, Marcus muttered, looking down at his shoes. It's like I can't win. No matter how hard I try, it's never enough. And now the people who used to support me are turning on me. I don't know if I can keep doing this. Jason nodded, his face thoughtful. Man, I get it. People always want to tear down what's different. But you can't let them control you. You've worked too hard to get to this point. You're not some project for them to mess with. You're Marcus. Marcus let out a breath, the weight on his chest easing just a little. Jason was right. He had come too far to let a few harsh words knock him off course. Thanks, Jason, Marcus said, feeling a little more grounded. Anytime, Jason replied, giving him a supportive pat on the back. Just remember, don't let them define you. You define yourself. As Marcus stood up to return to class, a sense of clarity washed over him. This was the challenge. This was the part of the journey he hadn't anticipated, the pressure, the isolation, the people who would try to hold him back. It wasn't going to be easy, but Marcus knew that the only way to succeed was to stay true to himself. It was time to face the challenge head-on. The week after Marcus spoke to Jason in the courtyard, things started to feel different. There was a strange weightlessness to the air, like the tension had broken, even if just a little. Marcus wasn't quite sure what had changed. Maybe it was the fact that he had acknowledged the pressure, or maybe it was the realization that he had been letting others control his narrative. Whatever it was, something inside him shifted. He didn't feel as trapped anymore. He could breathe again. Still, the whispers and sideways glances persisted, though they seemed less frequent. It wasn't that the students had stopped noticing him, they just hadn't found the same power in their words. They didn't have the same sting. And slowly, Marcus learned to brush it off. By the time the weekend rolled around, Marcus had a clearer sense of his own path. He spent hours revisiting the notes from Mrs. Brooks's class, reviewing his past work, and preparing for the next challenge. It wasn't just about the grades or the praise. It was about proving to himself that he could keep going, even when the world around him felt uncertain. He was no longer trying to fit into the mold others had set for him. He was going to set his own. Monday came with a buzz of anticipation. Mrs. Brooks had sent out an announcement that today would be a critical day in their learning process, and she had everyone's attention. The classroom felt electric, as if every student was expecting something big. As Marcus entered the room, Mrs. Brooks stood at the front, waiting. There was a quiet intensity in her posture. "Today," she said, her voice clear and confident, "we are going to step away from equations and theories. Today, you are going to face a real-world problem. And the problem is, you." A murmur rippled through the classroom, and Marcus felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Real-world problems? That could mean anything. "I'm not going to sugarcoat it," Mrs. Brooks continued. "You've all proven that you can solve abstract problems on paper. Now I want to see if you can solve real-life problems that don't have easy answers." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in. Marcus could feel the tension building. "You're going to face a decision. A big one. But this time, it's personal. There's no equation, no formula to solve it. It's a matter of who you are as a person. Your values. Your choices." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know what this challenge would be, but he knew it wouldn't be like anything he had done before. It wasn't about formulas or problems, it was about something deeper. Something that required real introspection. And that terrified him. "Here's your challenge," Mrs. Brooks said, stepping forward. "You will have to choose between two opportunities. One is a chance to stay where you are, in your comfort zone, with everything you know. The other is an opportunity to leave everything behind and take a leap of faith. But there's a catch, both options come with a price." The room went silent as Mrs. Brooks looked around at each of the students. She wasn't just addressing them as students anymore. She was talking to them as people. "The choice you make will affect your future," she continued. "The leap of faith may lead to something greater, but it's also the risk of failure. The comfortable option may guarantee stability, but it may also mean settling for less than you're capable of. You have to make the decision. And you have to live with it." Marcus's mind raced. What was she talking about? This wasn't just about academic success. This was about life. The kind of decisions that could change everything. The kind that had kept him awake at night. Was he ready to take a risk? Could he handle the consequences? Mrs. Brooks's eyes locked with his for a moment, and it felt as though she was speaking directly to him. She could see his struggle. She knew exactly what he was thinking. Her gaze softened, just for a moment, but it was enough to let him know that this wasn't just another test. This was something bigger. Something that would define who he was. The challenge was unlike anything Marcus had imagined. The question wasn't about math or logic, it was about courage. About whether he was willing to embrace the uncertainty that came with the future, to take the leap without knowing where it would lead. The class spent the rest of the period brainstorming their responses. But for Marcus, it wasn't about the details of the decision anymore. It was about confronting the part of him that had been holding him back for so long, the fear of failure. The fear of not being good enough. Of not being accepted. What if he took the leap, and it didn't work out? What if he failed? What if he never lived up to the expectations others had set for him? These were the questions that haunted him, the doubts that lingered in the back of his mind, clouding his every decision. But something in Mrs. Brooks's challenge broke through that fog. She wasn't asking for a perfect solution. She wasn't asking for him to have everything figured out. She was asking him to choose, to trust himself enough to take that first step. For the first time in a long while, Marcus realized that the answer wasn't about choosing between safety and risk. The real answer lay in choosing to trust in his ability to handle whatever came next. To have faith in his own strength, regardless of the outcome. The bell rang, signaling the end of class. But Marcus didn't immediately pack up his things. Instead, he sat there, staring at the challenge on the board. The decision wasn't an easy one. But for the first time, Marcus knew what he had to do. As he left the room, a strange calmness washed over him. It was the kind of calmness that comes when you know, deep down, that something has shifted inside of you. The kind of calmness that happens when you stop running from your fears and start facing them head-on. Later that day, as Marcus sat in his room, the weight of Mrs. Brooks's challenge lingered in his thoughts. He knew this was the moment that would shape his future. It wasn't just about solving problems on paper anymore, it was about taking that leap into the unknown. And even though the fears still gnawed at him, Marcus felt something new, a quiet but growing sense of resolve. The decision was his. And whatever he chose, he knew he would face it with everything he had. The next few days were a blur for Marcus. He could feel the weight of Mrs. Brooks's challenge pressing on him, each moment making him more aware of how much was at stake. There was no escaping it, his decision loomed over him like a storm cloud, constantly threatening to rain down at any moment. But the storm wasn't as intimidating as it had once been. In fact, it seemed strangely manageable, as if Marcus had learned to accept the uncertainty. When he woke up each morning, the first thought on his mind wasn't schoolwork or assignments, it was the choice he had to make. The choice between staying where he was, in the comfortable safety of his life, or taking that leap into the unknown. And as much as the idea of comfort had once seemed appealing, the more Marcus thought about it, the more he realized how much he longed for something greater. He wanted to prove to himself that he could break free from the cycle of doubt, that he could choose a future that felt truly his own. As much as he had feared failure in the past, Marcus started to see it as something different. Failure wasn't the end. It was just a part of the journey, a part of learning, growing, and becoming who he was meant to be. And though he still didn't have all the answers, he knew one thing for sure, he couldn't keep waiting for the perfect moment to come. The leap had to happen now. It was a Saturday when he finally made the decision. His family was out running errands, leaving him with some much-needed space to think. As he sat on the front porch, feeling the warm sunlight on his face, Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The sound of birds chirping and the distant hum of traffic faded into the background as his mind cleared. It was like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders, and for the first time in days, he felt at peace with his decision. He was going to take the leap. No more hesitating. No more second-guessing. He wasn't going to wait for the perfect moment to arrive. Instead, he was going to create that moment himself. Monday morning came quickly, and as Marcus walked into Mrs. Brooks's class, he felt the familiar knot of nervousness in his stomach. Today, he would have to share his decision. He had no idea what everyone else would say or how they would react. The other students had been talking about the challenge, and Marcus could feel the buzz in the air. Everyone seemed to be on edge, as though they were waiting for the moment when everything would change. As he took his seat, Marcus glanced over at Mrs. Brooks, who was already preparing for class. She caught his gaze and gave him a small, knowing smile. It was a smile that told him she understood. She didn't need to say anything, her presence alone was enough to make him feel like he wasn't facing this alone. "All right, class, Mrs. Brooks said, breaking the silence. We've all had some time to think about the challenge, and now it's time to hear your choices. I want each of you to stand up, share your decision, and explain why you chose what you did. The room was filled with murmurs, but Marcus could feel the spotlight on him. He wasn't ready to speak just yet. The choice had been made, but the words still felt heavy on his tongue. Still, he knew there was no turning back now. One by one, students stood up, offering their choices. Some chose the safe route, staying with what they knew, not risking everything for the unknown. Others chose the leap, ready to embrace the challenge, regardless of the cost. There were no right or wrong answers. Everyone's decision was personal, and Marcus could see how much it reflected who they were as individuals. When his turn came, Marcus stood up slowly, feeling the weight of every eye on him. He cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice steady but filled with an emotion he hadn't expected. "I've chosen the leap," he said, the words coming out more easily than he'd thought. "It's scary, and I don't know what's going to happen next. But I can't keep letting fear hold me back. I want to prove to myself that I'm capable of more. I've spent too long sitting on the sidelines, waiting for someone to tell me when it's my time. And I'm done waiting." There was a brief silence in the room, as if everyone was processing his words. Marcus wasn't sure what they were thinking, but he didn't care anymore. The decision had been made, and it was the right one for him. "Thank you, Marcus," Mrs. Brooks said, her voice filled with pride. "That's exactly the kind of courage we need. To choose the leap, even when we don't have all the answers. That's how we grow." Marcus sat back down, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure if it was the relief of finally making the decision or the fear of what would come next. But whatever it was, it felt like a weight had been lifted. For the first time, he felt like he was in control of his future. The rest of the day passed in a haze, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Not just in him, but in the world around him. His classmates, once distant and judgmental, seemed to look at him with new respect. There was no mocking, no whispering. Instead, there was a kind of quiet acknowledgement, as if they were seeing him for who he really was, a person who wasn't afraid to take risks and face the unknown. As Marcus walked home that afternoon, he felt lighter than he had in a long time. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the neighborhood, and for the first time in a while, Marcus felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The leap was only the beginning, but it was a beginning he was ready for. When he arrived home, his family was just pulling into the driveway. They greeted him with smiles, and though they didn't know about his decision yet, there was an unspoken sense of understanding between them. They knew he was growing, becoming someone stronger, someone more confident. As Marcus sat down for dinner, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He was no longer a kid waiting for life to happen to him. He was taking control, choosing his path, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was truly living. The leap had been taken. There was no turning back now. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The following week, Marcus felt as though he was walking through the aftermath of a storm. He had taken the leap, and though the first steps were exhilarating, they came with their own challenges. The reality of the decision began to settle in. The path wasn't as clear as he had hoped, and he quickly learned that stepping into the unknown didn't come without consequences. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a math exam. The challenge Mrs. Brooks had presented was still fresh in Marcus's mind, but as he sat at his desk, staring at the paper in front of him, the pressure of his decision weighed heavily. He had chosen the leap, but was he really ready for everything it entailed? Was he prepared for the consequences of his choices? The exam was no ordinary test. It was the culmination of everything they had learned in the semester, a challenge that would test not only their academic knowledge but their ability to think critically under pressure. Marcus had studied. He had prepared. But as the clock ticked down, he realized something unsettling: he wasn't as confident as he had been a week ago. The fear that had once kept him from taking risks now gripped him in a different way. What if he failed? What if his decision to leap had been the wrong one? He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the questions in front of him. But his mind kept drifting. His confidence, once renewed, now felt fragile. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the exam, Marcus gathered his things and left the classroom in a haze. He had done his best, but there was no escaping the gnawing feeling that he hadn't given it his all. The next few days passed in a blur of uncertainty. Mrs. Brooks continued to challenge her students, pushing them to think beyond the textbook and to embrace the discomfort of learning. But Marcus found himself struggling to keep up. His mind was clouded with doubt. He had taken the leap, but he didn't know if he was ready for what was coming next. His classmates noticed the shift too. They had seen the confidence he had exuded before, and now they saw something different. Marcus had always been the quiet one, but he had stood out with his intelligence and determination. Now, that same quietness seemed to carry an underlying hesitation. Jason was the first to approach him after class one day. He had always been someone who saw through Marcus's bravado, someone who knew when he was struggling. "Hey, man," Jason said, leaning against the doorframe. "You all right?" Marcus gave him a half-hearted smile. "Yeah. Just, a lot on my mind." Jason raised an eyebrow. "You're not looking like you're handling it that well. What's going on?" Marcus hesitated, unsure how to put his feelings into words. He didn't want to admit it, but he couldn't shake the fear that had crept up on him. The leap he had taken wasn't as freeing as he had imagined. It was hard. It was messy. And worst of all, it made him question whether he was even capable of succeeding. "I don't know if I'm ready for all this," Marcus admitted. "I thought I was. But now I'm not so sure." Jason pushed off from the doorframe and walked over to him. "Hey, listen. You don't have to have it all figured out right now. No one does. But you took the leap, man. And that's more than most people ever do. But what if it's the wrong decision?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I'm just failing?" Jason laughed, but it wasn't the mocking kind of laugh Marcus had expected. It was the kind that came with understanding. "You're not failing. You're learning. It's messy. But if it was easy, it wouldn't be worth it. Trust me. You've got this." Marcus nodded, though he wasn't entirely convinced. The words felt good, but they didn't erase the anxiety gnawing at his insides. He had chosen the leap, but now the fall seemed a lot more real. The day the results of the math exam came in, Marcus felt like he was walking into the principal's office, even though it was just Mrs. Brooks's classroom. The sense of dread weighed down on him, and as he scanned the room, he could feel the eyes of his classmates on him. He was just another student. But in his mind, everything had changed. The stakes were higher now. He wasn't just trying to survive anymore. He was trying to prove something. Mrs. Brooks passed out the graded exams with a detached professionalism. The other students immediately began to look over their papers, but Marcus just stared at the envelope in his hand. His fingers trembled, and for a moment, he wondered if he should just walk out of the room, pretend this never happened. But he knew that was cowardly, and cowardice wasn't going to help him succeed. So, he opened the envelope. The red marks on his paper were impossible to ignore. There were mistakes, big ones, throughout the entire test. His heart sank as he read through the questions he had missed, each one reminding him of his failure to rise to the challenge. He had worked hard, but it still hadn't been enough. He had fallen short. But then his eyes landed on something unexpected. At the bottom of the page, Mrs. Brooks had written a note. "Marcus, you have a great mind, but you're holding back. I know you're capable of more. Don't let fear define your potential. Learn from this, and come back stronger." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. They were both a challenge and a comfort, a reminder that he wasn't alone in his struggle. But they also stung. He had taken the leap, but here he was, on the ground, picking himself up after a fall. After class, Marcus lingered in the hallway, staring at the note from Mrs. Brooks. He couldn't escape the feeling that he was being tested, again. Only this time, it wasn't an exam he could study for. This test was about resilience. About getting back up, even when he didn't know if he had the strength. Jason found him leaning against the lockers, still holding the paper in his hands. "How'd it go?" he asked, his voice casual but with a trace of concern. Marcus sighed and handed him the paper. "Not great," he said, his voice tight with frustration. Jason glanced at the grade, then looked back at Marcus. "So what? You failed this one. It doesn't mean you failed for good. It's just a setback." "But what if I can't bounce back?" Marcus asked, his voice breaking a little. "What if I'm not cut out for this?" Jason looked at him seriously now, his tone firm. "You're not the kind of person to give up. Don't let one test define you. You've got the courage to keep going, even when it's hard. You took the leap, remember? That's what matters." Marcus swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his doubt and fear pressing down on him. But Jason was right. He had made a choice. And now, it was up to him to prove that it was the right one. Even if the road was bumpy. As he walked home that day, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was facing something much bigger than any test. He wasn't just trying to survive. He was learning how to thrive in the face of failure. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real leap he had to make. The days after the exam were filled with a quiet tension for Marcus. He had made a decision, and he had taken a leap, but the journey wasn't as smooth as he'd hoped. The road ahead was filled with obstacles, and for the first time, he was truly realizing how much work was required to make that leap meaningful. The next few days were a mix of self-reflection and determination. He had failed the math test, yes, but the words from Mrs. Brooks had given him something else to hold on to: hope. Hope was an odd thing. It wasn't a guarantee. It wasn't an answer to all his problems. But it was a reason to keep moving forward, even when it felt like everything was falling apart. Marcus spent his Saturday doing something he hadn't done in a long time: studying. It was a simple act, but one that held so much meaning for him now. He sat at his desk, surrounded by textbooks and notes, trying to piece together the concepts he had failed to grasp the first time around. The failures were fresh, but so were the lessons he'd learned. He had to face those mistakes head-on, and that meant committing to the work. He couldn't let fear stop him anymore. He had already chosen to leap, so now he had to make sure it wasn't a leap to nowhere. The hours passed quickly. His eyes were tired, his back ached, but he refused to stop. The idea of quitting crossed his mind more than once, but each time, he pushed it away. He was more than the sum of his mistakes, and this time, he wouldn't give in. It wasn't just about the math test anymore. It was about something bigger, something deeper. It was about proving to himself that he could rise above the doubts that plagued him, that he could handle failure and come back stronger. By the time the sun began to set, Marcus felt a sense of accomplishment. The material didn't seem as daunting as it had before. It was still challenging, but he knew he had the tools to tackle it. The leap wasn't just about taking a risk, it was about preparing for what came after the fall. Monday arrived, and Marcus couldn't help but feel a mix of anticipation and dread. The upcoming week was a critical one, not just for school, but for himself. He had made progress, but would it be enough? Mrs. Brooks had been pushing him, challenging him, and now it was time to see if he was ready to rise to the occasion. As he entered the classroom, he noticed a change in the air. There was a subtle shift, a sense of expectation. Mrs. Brooks was standing at the front of the room, her arms folded, but her gaze soft and focused on the class. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she waited for the room to settle before finally addressing the students. "All right, class," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It's time to get to work. We're moving forward now. We've learned the lessons from the last exam, and now we have to make sure we don't let those lessons slip away. Marcus felt the weight of her words, but also a spark of motivation. She wasn't just talking about the material. She was talking about something deeper. She was asking them all to learn from their failures, to understand that it wasn't the mistakes that defined them, but the choices they made in response to those mistakes. Mrs. Brooks began to give out new assignments, but her eyes briefly met Marcus's. For just a second, she nodded, as though she was silently encouraging him. Marcus felt a rush of gratitude. Mrs. Brooks wasn't giving up on him, even when he had doubted himself. The next few weeks were a blur of study sessions, late nights, and a renewed commitment to his goals. Marcus became more disciplined in his approach to school. He wasn't just doing the work because he had to, he was doing it because he wanted to prove to himself that he could. Jason, as always, was there to offer encouragement. The two of them spent hours studying together after school, helping each other work through difficult concepts. Jason's steady optimism balanced out Marcus's moments of doubt. If Marcus started to lose hope, Jason was quick to remind him that progress came in small steps. "You can't climb the mountain all at once," Jason would say, "but every step gets you closer." And Marcus took those steps. Slowly but surely, he began to see the results. His grades improved, his confidence grew, and the once overwhelming fear of failure became something more manageable. He wasn't afraid to fail anymore. He was afraid of not trying, of letting the fear hold him back from reaching his full potential. By the time the final exam rolled around, Marcus felt a sense of readiness. It wasn't the same kind of readiness he had felt before, when everything was about getting things perfect the first time. No, this was different. This readiness was built on the foundation of understanding that failure was a part of the process, not the end of the road. On the day of the exam, Marcus walked into the classroom with a calmness he hadn't expected. The nerves were still there, but they weren't overwhelming. They were just a reminder that he cared about the outcome. More than anything, he was focused. He had done the work, he had faced his fears, and now it was time to see how far he had come. Mrs. Brooks watched him closely as he sat down at his desk. She didn't say anything, but her gaze was steady and encouraging, as though she knew exactly what he was thinking. This wasn't just about the test. It was about everything that had come before it. As the exam began, Marcus went through the questions one by one, his mind focused and calm. The equations didn't feel as foreign as they once had. He didn't feel the panic rising in his chest when he encountered a difficult question. Instead, he took a deep breath, worked through it step by step, and moved on. The clock ticked down, and when it was over, Marcus felt a sense of pride. He didn't know if he had aced the exam, but it didn't matter. The true victory had already happened. He had learned how to face his fears. He had learned how to rise after falling. And he had learned that success wasn't just about the destination. It was about the journey. When the results came back, Marcus was surprised. He hadn't expected to score perfectly, but he had passed with a solid grade. It wasn't a perfect score, but it was an accomplishment nonetheless. Mrs. Brooks's note on his exam was simple, but it carried so much weight. "Marcus, I knew you had it in you. You've come so far. Keep pushing." Those words felt like a validation of everything he had worked for. They weren't just about the grade, they were about the growth, the perseverance, and the strength he had found within himself. As Marcus left class that day, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. He had taken the leap. And though the path had been difficult, it had led him to a place he never thought he would reach. He was no longer the same person who had hesitated at the edge of the cliff. He had jumped, and he had learned to fly. The journey wasn't over, but Marcus knew that he was on the right path. And that, in itself, was enough. The weeks following the final exam were a whirlwind of emotions and reflections for Marcus. As he sat in the classroom the Monday after receiving his test results, a strange feeling washed over him. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace with himself. It was a quiet kind of peace, not a loud victory or a boastful celebration, but a deep, quiet acknowledgement that he had overcome something significant. The journey from uncertainty to confidence had been hard, but it was worth every step. Yet, as much as Marcus had grown, as much as he felt like he had conquered some of his inner battles, he knew this was only the beginning. Mrs. Brooks was relentless in her expectations, and she was never one to allow her students to sit back and relax once they had met one challenge. Her belief in Marcus, despite everything, had pushed him further than he could have ever imagined. But now, the real question remained, could he keep up? Could he prove that he was more than just a student who had passed an exam? The first sign that there was still more to prove came when Mrs. Brooks announced the new project for the class. This time, it wasn't just a test or an assignment. It was a challenge, one that would push every student in the room to their limits. Mrs. Brooks stood before them, her usual confident stance now carrying a sharper edge. This project, she began, her voice low and steady, will determine the direction of your grade for the rest of the semester. It's a collaborative project. You'll be working in pairs. You'll create a presentation, write a detailed paper, and solve a real-world problem that requires a high level of critical thinking. The room went silent, save for the rustle of notebooks and pens. Marcus exchanged glances with Jason, who raised his eyebrows, clearly as stunned as Marcus. This was bigger than anything they had done before. Mrs. Brooks went on, detailing the scope of the project. You'll be solving a problem that has both academic and societal relevance. I want to see how you approach it, how you break it down, and, most importantly, how you collaborate. It's not just about solving the problem, it's about showing me your process, your ability to work together, and your capacity for creative, critical thinking. Marcus felt the weight of her words. This wasn't just about intelligence. This was about teamwork, problem solving, and the ability to think beyond the classroom. It was about making an impact, even in a small way. It was the next logical step in his journey, and it was terrifying. What if he failed again? What if the pressure to collaborate with someone else was too much? Jason nudged him gently. Hey, we're partners, right? Marcus nodded slowly, the anxiety creeping back into his chest. Yeah. But, what if we can't pull it off? What if I can't handle this? Jason gave him a reassuring grin. We've got this. You've already shown yourself what you're capable of. This is just another leap. The words hit Marcus like a wave. Another leap. The idea of taking another risk, of stepping into the unknown once again, wasn't as terrifying as it had been before. In fact, it was oddly comforting. He had taken a leap already, he had survived. And now, it was time to do it again, but this time with someone by his side. The next few days were filled with brainstorming, planning, and working through the complexity of the project. Marcus and Jason had chosen a topic that felt important to both of them, exploring the impact of mental health awareness in high schools. It was a subject that resonated with Marcus. Having struggled with his own mental health in the past, he understood the weight of such issues. But the more they worked on the project, the more he realized how much he had to learn. They dove into research, dissecting articles, studying case studies, and trying to build a cohesive presentation that could inform and inspire. But the work wasn't easy. They disagreed frequently, their ideas often clashing in ways that made Marcus question if they'd even make it through without tearing their project apart. Jason was a perfectionist, always pushing for more data, more facts, and a clearer message. Marcus, on the other hand, believed they needed to tap into the emotional side of the issue, showing the human element behind the statistics. There were moments of frustration, moments when Marcus felt like everything was falling apart. It was hard to keep the momentum going when they disagreed. It was hard to stay patient when the project seemed like an insurmountable mountain they couldn't climb. Then came the turning point. One afternoon, after yet another heated argument, Marcus found himself walking alone around the school grounds. He had stormed out of the library in frustration, not sure if he could continue the project, let alone finish it with Jason. The weight of the task, of his own insecurities, had hit him full force. What if he wasn't good enough? What if Jason was right, and he wasn't cut out for this? He sat down on a bench, his head in his hands, trying to gather his thoughts. The noise of the school around him was distant. His mind was a mess, overwhelmed with self-doubt. He had come so far, he couldn't let this project undo everything. He couldn't let himself fail. And then it hit him. A realization that came crashing down with the force of a revelation. He wasn't in this alone. He didn't have to do it all by himself. He had a partner. A friend. And together, they could find a way to balance their strengths and weaknesses. Marcus took a deep breath and pulled out his phone, texting Jason. "We need to talk. Let's fix this. Together." They met later that day, this time with a sense of calm that had been missing before. Jason had apologized, too, acknowledging that he had been pushing too hard for perfection. They sat down and decided to focus on the parts of the project that they both cared about. They would combine Jason's analytical strength with Marcus's passion for the human side of the issue. It was the perfect balance, and it was exactly what they needed to make their project stand out. The following weeks were a whirlwind of progress. The tension had dissipated. Marcus and Jason began working in harmony, their different approaches complementing each other. They brought their project to life, creating a compelling, well-rounded presentation that captured both the academic and emotional aspects of mental health awareness in schools. As the project neared completion, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. It wasn't just about the grade anymore. It was about the journey they had taken together, the way they had faced their differences, worked through their struggles, and come out on the other side stronger. When the day of the presentation arrived, Marcus stood at the front of the class, his heart racing. This was it. The culmination of weeks of hard work. As he and Jason began speaking, Marcus felt a rush of confidence he hadn't expected. This wasn't just about showing what they had learned. It was about showing who they were. How they had grown, how they had faced challenges and overcome them. When they finished, Mrs. Brooks gave them a long, thoughtful look. She didn't say anything at first, and for a moment, Marcus felt a flicker of doubt. But then Mrs. Brooks nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "You've done well," she said simply. "This is exactly the kind of work I've been waiting for." And in that moment, Marcus realized that the true challenge had never been about passing the test. It had been about learning to trust himself, and others, and knowing that even when things got difficult, he could still rise to the occasion. The days following the project presentation felt surreal for Marcus. He couldn't quite believe how far he had come. It was as if the very weight of his past struggles had finally begun to lift. The classroom felt different now. No longer was it a place of stress and self-doubt, but a space where he could feel his growth every time he entered. His classmates, too, seemed to recognize the change in him. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that had been absent before. Even Mrs. Brooks, who had pushed him so relentlessly from the very beginning, seemed to view him differently. Her approval, though often subtle, was a powerful force for Marcus. When she told him he had done well after their project, he had felt a rush of pride, not just in the work they had done, but in how far he had come since the first day he walked into her class. However, Marcus was far from naive. He knew that one project didn't erase the weight of the years before it. He knew that one success didn't guarantee the next. It wasn't that he feared failure, it was simply the reality that the journey ahead would never stop demanding more from him. As the end of the semester approached, the pressure began to build again. The final grades for the project were coming soon, and the class was preparing for yet another exam. But this time, it wasn't just about Marcus showing up and passing the test. It was about proving that his growth wasn't a fluke, that he was capable of succeeding beyond the circumstances he had once allowed to define him. The weeks were filled with a familiar rhythm, late-night study sessions, brainstorming, and pushing through the moments of doubt that always seemed to resurface when the stakes were high. But there was something different about Marcus now. It wasn't just the hours of studying or the hard work. It was the way he approached every task with determination. He no longer felt like he was walking on eggshells, like every failure would be the one that crushed him. This time, he was more than his grades, he was more than his mistakes. His relationship with Jason had grown even stronger over the course of the semester. Their partnership had evolved into something more meaningful. They no longer saw each other just as classmates but as equals, pushing each other toward excellence. Jason was still the calm, methodical thinker, and Marcus was the passionate, driven voice of reason when it came to tackling big-picture concepts. Together, they formed a perfect team, one built on respect, trust, and mutual understanding. And then, as if to test everything Marcus had worked for, something unexpected happened. It was a Friday afternoon, just a week before the semester's final exams. The class was wrapping up, and Mrs. Brooks was handing out the last set of assignments before the break. Marcus took his paper, scanned the room, and noticed a few students exchanging nervous glances. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Everyone seemed to be waiting for Mrs. Brooks to make some kind of announcement. She cleared her throat and stepped to the front of the room. "All right, class," she said, her voice steady but carrying a hint of seriousness. "Before you all leave today, I have an important announcement. As some of you may know, there's an opportunity for one student in this class to take on an internship with a prestigious summer program. It's highly competitive, and it's a chance to work with professionals in the field of math and science. This internship could set you on a path to something much bigger than just high school graduation." The room went silent. Marcus could feel his heart rate increase. An internship? He wasn't sure what Mrs. Brooks was about to say, but the idea of an opportunity like that seemed completely out of his reach. He was the student who had struggled for so long. He was the one who had barely passed her class just a few months ago. Mrs. Brooks continued. "This opportunity will go to the student who can demonstrate not only the best academic performance but also the most growth, the most potential. It's not just about the grades, it's about the work ethic, the perseverance, and the ability to push through challenges." Marcus's mind was racing. Who would she choose? It couldn't possibly be him. There were students in the class who had always been the top performers, students who never struggled, who always got things right on the first try. And then there was Marcus, who had barely scraped through the beginning of the semester, fighting against everything he thought he knew about himself. But then Mrs. Brooks did something Marcus hadn't expected. She turned to him, her eyes meeting his with a knowing look. "Marcus," she said, her voice steady, "you've made remarkable progress. I want to see you apply for this internship. I believe you have the potential to go far. This is your chance to prove to yourself just how much you've grown." Marcus's breath caught in his chest. Was she serious? Could she really see him that way? He had worked hard, yes, but there was no way he could be in the same league as some of the others. He couldn't stop himself from shaking his head. I don't think I'm the right person for it, Mrs. Brooks," Marcus stammered, his voice shaking. "There are students who are way more qualified than I am." Mrs. Brooks stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "Marcus, you're exactly the kind of student they're looking for. You're not just smart. You're resilient. You're determined. And those are qualities that can't be measured on a test." Marcus sat in stunned silence. The idea of applying for the internship felt both terrifying and exhilarating. It was a chance to take everything he had worked for and prove it on a much bigger stage. But at the same time, it felt like the stakes had never been higher. Jason leaned over and whispered, "You've got this, man. Don't let it slip away." The weekend that followed was a whirlwind of self-reflection. Marcus knew this was his moment. He didn't want to let the doubt he had carried around for so long prevent him from taking the leap. The path to getting the internship would require more than just academic excellence, it would require an application that conveyed everything he had learned over the past year. His determination, his growth, his ability to fight through the hardest moments. By Sunday night, Marcus had completed his application, pouring every ounce of his journey into the essay. He wrote about how he had struggled, how he had failed, and how he had refused to let those failures define him. He spoke about his commitment to his work, his desire to make a difference, and his belief that his background, his story, was an asset, not a liability. When he hit submit, he felt both nervous and proud. He had done everything he could. All that was left was to wait and see if it was enough. The next week, Marcus received the email that would change everything. He had been selected for an interview for the internship. He stared at the screen, his heart racing. His breath caught in his throat. For a moment, he didn't know what to feel. He had come so far already. This was another leap, another chance to prove that he was more than the sum of his past. And as the interview approached, Marcus knew one thing for sure: no matter what happened next, he had already proven to himself that he was capable of achieving greatness. The journey was far from over, but it was his journey, and he was ready for whatever came next. The morning of the interview arrived sooner than Marcus had expected. It seemed like only yesterday that he had clicked "Submit" on his application, unsure of whether he even stood a chance. Now, as he stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his button-down shirt and straightening his tie, he felt a mixture of anticipation and nerves. He had made it this far, but the interview was a whole new challenge, an opportunity to prove to himself, and to others, that he belonged. He took a deep breath and reminded himself of the journey. From the young man who could barely hold his head up in Mrs. Brooks's class, to the student who now had the chance to prove his worth in front of professionals. He had earned this, through his grit, his resilience, and his ability to learn from failure. The memories of those moments when he almost gave up were still vivid, but they no longer held power over him. They were the past, he was focused on the present. As he made his way to the internship's office, a part of him wanted to turn back. He had never imagined himself in this position. He had always been the student who struggled, the one who had to work harder than everyone else just to stay afloat. But now, he was going to sit across from professionals who had likely never had to fight the same battles. How could he measure up? Marcus arrived at the building, its sleek, modern design intimidating him even more. The lobby was quiet, filled with the low hum of conversations and the clicking of keyboards. He walked to the receptionist and announced himself, his hands slightly trembling. "Marcus Blackwell, here for the internship interview," he said, his voice quieter than usual, despite the confidence he tried to muster. The receptionist smiled and motioned for him to sit down. "Please take a seat. The interviewers will be with you shortly." As Marcus sat down, he glanced around the room. There were other candidates waiting, some reading through notes, others tapping on their phones. He couldn't help but notice how polished they all seemed, how prepared. He felt out of place, like he didn't belong. It wasn't a feeling he was used to anymore, but the nerves had a way of creeping in when the stakes were high. Just as he was beginning to second-guess himself, a woman in a sharp suit came through the door, holding a clipboard. She smiled when she saw him. "Marcus Blackwell." "We're ready for you," she said, her tone professional but warm. Marcus nodded, trying to calm his nerves. "Thank you." He followed her down a long hallway to a conference room, where two other people were already seated at a long table. They both greeted him with smiles and gestures to take a seat across from them. Marcus noticed that their names were written on nameplates in front of them: Dr. Elena West, a professor in behavioral science, and Mr. Charles Reed, a well-known scientist in the field of biology. Both of them were older, seasoned professionals with a wealth of experience that Marcus could only imagine. "Marcus, thank you for coming today," Drive West said, her voice warm yet authoritative. "We've reviewed your application, and we're excited to speak with you. We'd like to hear more about you, about your background, and why you're interested in this internship." The question, though simple, hit Marcus hard. Why was he interested? Was it because it was a prestigious opportunity? Was it because Mrs. Brooks had encouraged him? Or was it because, deep down, he wanted to prove that he could succeed in a world that had never quite seen him as capable? Taking a deep breath, Marcus began. I'm interested in this internship because I believe in the power of knowledge and change. I've always been fascinated by how we can use science and education to make a difference. But more than that, I've been on a journey of my own, fighting through personal struggles, facing failures, and learning that success isn't just about getting things right on the first try. It's about resilience, and about understanding that every setback is just part of the process. I want this opportunity because it would push me further, beyond what I've always known about myself, and it would give me a chance to contribute to something bigger than me. His words hung in the air for a moment. The silence felt heavy, but then Drive West nodded thoughtfully. That's an excellent response, Marcus. We can see that you've put a lot of thought into your journey and your motivations. Now, let's talk about how you approach challenges. Can you give us an example of a time when you faced a difficult situation and how you overcame it? Marcus's mind flashed to the countless moments in Mrs. Brooks's class, the late-night study sessions, the moments when he felt like giving up, and of course, the success he had achieved in the project with Jason. He took another steadying breath, remembering to focus on his growth rather than the fear of failure. There was a time earlier this year in school when I really struggled with a project. I wasn't sure I could complete it, and I didn't think I'd pass. But my teacher, Mrs. Brooks, believed in me. She challenged me, pushed me harder than I ever thought I could go, and it made me realize that sometimes the hardest challenges are the ones that teach you the most. With the help of a classmate, I was able to push through and deliver the project. It wasn't easy, but I learned that failure isn't the end, it's just part of getting better. Marcus could see that Drive West and Mr. Reed were both listening intently, their expressions thoughtful. Mr. Reed leaned forward slightly, asking the next question. Tell us about a time when you worked with others to solve a problem. What was your role, and how did you handle the collaboration? Marcus didn't hesitate. The answer was easy. He spoke about his partnership with Jason, about how their differing ideas had created friction but also led to a stronger project in the end. He talked about the importance of communication, listening, and the way they both had to step out of their comfort zones to make the project work. As he spoke, Marcus could feel himself becoming more comfortable, his nerves beginning to dissipate. The interview wasn't just about impressing them, it was about sharing his story, his journey, and his growth. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with questions ranging from his academic interests to his long-term goals. Throughout the entire interview, Marcus was surprised by how natural it felt. He wasn't just answering questions, he was telling his story, weaving in the lessons he had learned, and demonstrating the person he had become over the past year. As the interview came to a close, Drive West gave him a thoughtful smile. Thank you for sharing with us, Marcus. You've clearly done a lot of hard work, and it shows. We'll be in touch soon. Marcus nodded, standing to leave. As he walked out of the room, he felt an overwhelming sense of relief. No matter the outcome, he had done his best. He had shown up, he had spoken from the heart, and he had proven that he was capable of much more than he had ever given himself credit for. As he walked out of the building, Marcus felt the weight of his journey shift yet again. This wasn't the end, it was just another step forward. Whatever the outcome of the interview, he had already proven that he could rise above his circumstances. The days following Marcus's interview felt like an eternity. Every time he checked his phone, his heart skipped a beat. Had they called yet? Had they sent an email? The fear of rejection gnawed at him, no matter how hard he tried to push it aside. It wasn't just about the internship, it was about proving to himself, once and for all, that he belonged in these spaces, that his hard work had value. But each time, there was no new message, no email from the internship program. The anxiety mounted, his thoughts growing darker with each passing day. What if he wasn't good enough? What if he had said the wrong thing during the interview? What if they saw through the facade, through the uncertainty that still lingered deep within him? He tried to distract himself by diving into his studies. His grades had improved, and he knew he had worked hard for that. But even as he solved equations and reviewed notes, his mind kept drifting back to the interview. To that one, crucial moment that could change everything. It was a Wednesday afternoon, a full week after his interview, when Marcus finally received the email. His fingers trembled as he opened it, his heart pounding in his chest. Subject: Internship Program Decision. Dear Marcus, thank you for your patience during this time. After careful consideration, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for the internship position with our summer program. Your passion, dedication, and resilience stood out to us, and we are excited to offer you the opportunity to join our team. Please review the attached documents for further instructions regarding the program details. We look forward to working with you and watching you continue to grow. Congratulations again. Sincerely, Dr. Elena West, Internship Coordinator. Marcus couldn't believe his eyes. He read the email again, and again, to make sure it wasn't some kind of mistake. Selected. He had been selected. After all the struggles, the setbacks, the moments of doubt, this was it. This was the moment he had worked for, the culmination of everything he had fought through. He let out a long, shaky breath, his mind racing. He had done it. He had truly done it. As soon as he processed the news, he called Jason. He didn't even need to say much, Jason knew. There was an excited cheer on the other end of the line, followed by words of congratulations. You did it, man. Jason said, his voice filled with genuine joy. I knew you had it in you. This is huge. Marcus laughed, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. I can't believe it. It still feels unreal. You earned it, Jason insisted. You worked harder than anyone else. Don't sell yourself short. Marcus sat down on his bed, staring at the email again. He thought of Mrs. Brooks, her words, her belief in him. She had seen something in him long before he could see it in himself. She had pushed him, sometimes ruthlessly, but always with the belief that he was capable of so much more than he had ever imagined. The thought made him smile, a deep, grateful smile. He picked up his phone and sent her a message. Subject: Thank you. Dear Mrs. Brooks, I just wanted to let you know that I've been selected for the internship. I can't believe it. I don't think I would have gotten this far without your belief in me, without you pushing me to be better every single day. I'm truly grateful for everything you've done. Thank you. Best. Marcus Blackwell. He hit send and sat back, feeling the weight of his gratitude. It was more than just a thank you. It was a recognition of everything she had done for him, everything she had helped him realize about himself. It wasn't long before he received a response from Mrs. Brooks. Her words were simple, but they carried the depth of the connection they had formed over the past months. Subject: Thank you. Marcus. I'm so proud of you. You've come so far, and this is just the beginning. Don't stop believing in yourself. You've proven that you can do anything you set your mind to. This internship is only a stepping stone for you. Keep pushing forward. Congratulations, and remember, this is your success, but it's also the result of the hard work you put in. You've earned every bit of it. Best. Mrs. Brooks. Reading her response, Marcus felt his eyes sting with emotion. He had worked so hard for this moment, but it wasn't just about the internship, it was about everything he had learned along the way. It was about realizing that he wasn't defined by his past, by the struggles that had once seemed insurmountable. He was defined by his ability to keep moving forward, to keep fighting, even when the road ahead seemed unclear. The next few days were a blur as Marcus began preparing for the internship. There were forms to fill out, meetings to attend, and orientations to schedule. Each step felt surreal, like something out of a dream. But as he moved through the motions, one thing became clear: this wasn't just an opportunity for growth, it was a responsibility. He had worked hard to get here, but he also knew that this was his chance to give back, to show that his story, his journey, could inspire others. His phone rang one afternoon, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was Mrs. Brooks. "Marcus," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "I just heard the news. I'm so proud of you. I knew you had it in you." "Thank you, Mrs. Brooks," Marcus replied, his voice filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you." "I know you couldn't have," she said with a laugh. "But I'm glad I was able to help you see your potential. I've seen so many students come through my classroom, but you, Marcus. You're something special. Don't forget that." As they talked, Marcus realized something profound. He wasn't just achieving for himself anymore, he was achieving for the people who believed in him. For Jason, who had always been by his side. For Mrs. Brooks, who had never given up on him. For his mother, who had raised him with the belief that anything was possible if he worked hard enough. And for himself, the young man who once thought he wasn't capable of succeeding in the world. The young man who had now found his place in it. As Marcus reflected on everything he had accomplished, he realized that this was just the beginning. The internship was a massive step forward, but it was only one chapter in his ongoing story. The road ahead was still full of challenges, but for the first time in his life, Marcus wasn't afraid. He knew he was capable of facing whatever came his way. With the internship on the horizon, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. And he was ready to take on the world, one step at a time. The first day of the internship felt like a culmination of everything Marcus had worked for. He had spent the past few weeks preparing, learning the ropes of the program, and brushing up on his skills. But nothing could fully prepare him for the feeling of stepping into that office, knowing that this opportunity was real, that he was no longer a spectator in his own story but a participant in something bigger than himself. As he walked through the doors of the internship program's office, he was greeted by the same woman who had led him to his interview, Jane Harper, the program coordinator. She was in her mid-30s, with sharp eyes and a friendly smile. "Marcus, welcome aboard. We're thrilled to have you here," she said, extending her hand. "I'm glad you made it." Marcus shook her hand, trying to quell the nervous energy bubbling in his chest. "Thank you. I'm excited to be here." Jane led him through the office, where people were already at work, typing away at their computers, collaborating in small groups, and making calls. It was a bustling environment, and for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. She gave him a brief tour, introducing him to the staff members who would be his mentors throughout the internship. They were a diverse group, each one with a different background and expertise. As they spoke, Marcus realized that this was his chance not just to learn from the best, but to build relationships with people who were going to help him grow, who were going to show him what was possible in the world outside the classroom. The first task she assigned him was to help with a research project on environmental sustainability. It was a project that required a lot of data analysis, but also an understanding of the broader implications of their findings. It felt like a challenge, but Marcus wasn't intimidated. This was why he was here, to push himself, to face new challenges head-on and prove that he was capable of anything. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Marcus found himself immersed in the research, analyzing statistics, working late into the night, and brainstorming solutions to complex problems. At first, it was overwhelming. The other interns seemed to have a level of experience he couldn't quite match. They spoke confidently about theories and concepts he hadn't fully grasped yet. But Marcus didn't let that stop him. He stayed late, asked questions, and dug deeper into the material. It was during one of these late-night sessions that Marcus had his breakthrough. He was staring at a set of data, trying to make sense of it, when he saw something that didn't quite add up. It was a subtle detail, something most people would have overlooked. But Marcus's mind clicked into gear, and he realized that the dataset had an error, one that could completely change the outcome of the study. He sat back, his heart pounding. This was it. This was the moment where all of his hard work had led him. He had found something that no one else had seen. Without hesitation, he printed out the data and took it to Jane's office. "Marcus, what's up?" she asked when he knocked on her door. "I think I found something," he said, his voice steady but full of excitement. "There's an error in the dataset. If we correct it, the results could change drastically." Jane raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. She followed him back to his desk and sat down beside him as he showed her the data. As Marcus explained his findings, Jane's expression shifted from curiosity to awe. She quickly pulled up the analysis on her own computer and confirmed what he had noticed. "This is incredible," Jane said, her voice filled with admiration. "You found a major flaw. If we hadn't caught this, it could have compromised the entire project." Marcus felt a surge of pride. It was one of those moments when everything he had worked for seemed to come together. It wasn't just about solving a problem, it was about showing that he was capable, that his perspective and abilities were valuable. "That's what I'm here for," Marcus said, trying to keep his cool. Jane smiled, patting him on the back. "Absolutely. This is the kind of thinking we need. Keep it up." Word of Marcus's discovery spread quickly through the office, and soon, colleagues began to recognize him as someone with a sharp eye and a natural talent for problem-solving. His confidence grew with every task he tackled, every hurdle he overcame. And as he settled into the rhythm of the internship, he began to realize something even more profound: the skills and knowledge he was gaining weren't just about the work. They were shaping the person he was becoming. For the first time in his life, Marcus truly felt like he belonged. One evening, after a particularly successful day at the office, Marcus decided to call home. His mom had been a constant source of support throughout his journey, and he wanted to share his progress with her. "Hey, Mom," Marcus said when she answered the phone. "I just wanted to let you know that things are going really well. I've been working on a huge research project, and I found a mistake that could have affected the entire study." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a sound of pride in his mother's voice. "Marcus, that's amazing. I knew you had it in you." "I don't know, Mom," Marcus replied. "I guess I'm just doing what I've always been doing, working hard, pushing myself. But this internship, it's different. I finally feel like I'm making a real impact." She laughed softly. "You've always made an impact, Marcus. Even when you didn't see it. But I'm glad you're finally seeing it for yourself." His heart swelled with gratitude. It had been a long road to get here, but every step had led him to this moment. He had come so far, and yet, in many ways, he knew he was just beginning. As the weeks went by, Marcus became more involved in the office's projects. He worked alongside scientists, researchers, and other interns, learning from them and contributing his own insights. His growth wasn't just in his academic skills. It was in his confidence, his ability to communicate with others, and his sense of purpose. One afternoon, Drive West stopped by the office to check in on Marcus's progress. She had heard about the work he was doing and wanted to see it firsthand. "Marcus, I've been hearing great things about you," she said, her voice full of pride. "You're making a real difference here." Marcus smiled, feeling a warm sense of accomplishment. "Thank you. I'm just doing my best." Drive West nodded. "That's all anyone can do. But it's clear that you've been pushing yourself beyond what you thought was possible." As they walked through the office together, discussing the latest findings, Marcus felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything he had been through. Every struggle, every setback, had led him to this place. And now, he was on the path to something greater. As he stood there, looking at the work he had done and the people he had come to respect, Marcus couldn't help but think back to the moment when Mrs. Brooks had told him he would never succeed. How foolish that statement seemed now. He had succeeded, not just in this internship, but in life. And this was just the beginning. It was nearing the end of Marcus's internship, and everything had been falling into place. The project on environmental sustainability was nearing completion, and Marcus was entrusted with presenting the findings at a company-wide meeting. It was the type of responsibility he had dreamed of when he first walked through the doors, uncertain and full of self-doubt. Now, he felt ready, more than ready. But the anxiety was still there, lingering at the edges of his thoughts, reminding him of the journey it had taken to get here. He spent the next few days rehearsing his presentation, tweaking the slides, and ensuring that every detail was perfect. He had come so far, and he didn't want to blow it now. That morning, as he walked into the conference room, he was met by the familiar faces of his colleagues and supervisors. The energy in the room was palpable. This was a big deal. It was a chance to showcase not just his work, but his growth, his transformation over the past few months. "Marcus, you're up next," Jane Harper said, giving him an encouraging smile as she passed him a cup of coffee. "You're going to do great." He nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle into his chest. He adjusted his tie and stood up to face the group. His heart pounded in his chest, but he knew this was his moment to shine. The room grew quiet as Marcus began his presentation. The slides clicked one by one, and he explained the research, the data, and the conclusions with confidence. But it wasn't just the facts that held their attention, it was the way Marcus spoke, the passion that resonated through every word. He wasn't just explaining a study, he was telling a story about his growth, about overcoming obstacles, and about the power of persistence. As he continued, he could feel the eyes of his colleagues on him. It was more than just a professional meeting, it was an affirmation of everything he had worked for, everything he had proved to himself. The longer he spoke, the more his nerves began to fade. This was his moment, and he wasn't going to let fear take it from him. When he finished, the room was silent for a beat, and then, slowly, the applause started. First from Jane, then from Drive West, and then from everyone else in the room. Marcus stood there, stunned, his heart racing. He hadn't expected the applause to feel this overwhelming. This wasn't just about a job well done, it was the recognition of a journey, the acknowledgement of how far he had come. "Marcus," Drive West said, stepping forward with a smile. "That was exceptional. You've truly outdone yourself." Marcus smiled, trying to contain his emotions. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without all of you." As he walked back to his seat, his mind wandered to the people who had helped him get to this point, the ones who believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. Jason, his mother, Mrs. Brooks. And, of course, all the people who had supported him at the internship. It was because of them that he could stand here, confident, proud of the work he had done. That evening, after the meeting, Marcus decided to reach out to someone who had been a constant throughout his journey. He dialed Mrs. Brooks's number, eager to share the news. "Hello," she answered, her voice warm as always. "Mrs. Brooks, it's Marcus," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "I just finished my presentation, and it went amazing. They loved the work, and they actually gave me a round of applause afterward." "I knew you could do it," Mrs. Brooks responded immediately, her tone full of pride. "You've worked so hard for this. I'm so proud of you." "I don't think I would have gotten here without you," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were the one who pushed me, who never gave up on me. You made me believe that I could do something this big." She chuckled softly. "Marcus, I only helped you see what was already inside of you. You were always capable. You just needed to realize it." A lump formed in his throat. "Thank you. Thank you so much." "You don't need to thank me," Mrs. Brooks replied gently. "You did the work. You did the hard part. Now, the world is your oyster. Keep pushing, keep striving. You've only just begun." As they spoke, Marcus realized something profound. This was more than just a success story. It wasn't just about getting the internship or completing the project. It was about who he had become along the way. The boy who had struggled with his self-worth, who had been told he would never succeed, was now standing tall in front of the world, confident, capable, and proud. The internship came to a close, but Marcus's journey was far from over. He had received multiple offers for full-time positions at the company, but the question now was what he wanted to do next. He had options, so many options, and for the first time, the future seemed wide open. As he sat in his small apartment one evening, looking out at the city lights, Marcus reflected on everything that had led him here. The long nights, the endless study sessions, the moments of doubt. They had all been worth it. They had shaped him into someone who no longer feared failure but embraced it as part of the journey. And now, with the world at his feet, Marcus knew one thing for certain: he was ready for whatever came next. But as he thought about his next steps, his thoughts turned to something else: the ones who had been there from the start. His mom, who had always told him he could do anything. Jason, who had stuck by him through every challenge. And Mrs. Brooks, the teacher who had believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. She had planted a seed of hope that had grown into something remarkable. He pulled out his phone, sending her a quick text. Subject: What's next? Mrs. Brooks. I just wanted to thank you again for everything you've done. This internship has been life-changing, and I wouldn't be here without you. It feels like the start of something huge, and I'm ready for it. I'm more confident than I've ever been, and I owe a lot of that to you. I hope I can make you proud in the next chapter. Best. Marcus. He hit send, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The words weren't enough to express everything he felt, but they were a start. The future, Marcus realized, was not something to fear. It was something to embrace. And as he looked ahead, he felt ready to face whatever challenges came his way. He had already proven to himself that he could succeed, and now, the world was waiting for him. The day Marcus received the job offer was the day everything felt like it had come full circle. He had worked tirelessly for months, learning, growing, and proving himself, and now, as he sat at his kitchen table, his hands trembling slightly as he opened the email, he felt an overwhelming sense of pride. The offer letter was clear: the company wanted him to join full-time as a junior data analyst. They were impressed with his skills, his attention to detail, and, most of all, his ability to think critically under pressure. Marcus had earned this position, and more than that, he had earned his place in the world of professionals who had once seemed so far out of reach. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen, trying to process the enormity of it all. There was a time not long ago when he doubted whether he would ever be able to reach this point. He had spent so much of his life feeling like he wasn't enough, like the obstacles were too great to overcome. But now, as he looked at the offer, it was as if every moment of doubt, every setback, every challenge had led him here. This was the result of years of hard work, of pushing through adversity, and of refusing to let anyone else define his future. Marcus didn't know what his mom or Jason would think when they heard the news, but he knew one thing for sure: he had to tell Mrs. Brooks. She had been a constant guiding force, the one person who had believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. Her unwavering faith had been the catalyst that propelled him forward. With a deep breath, he grabbed his phone and dialed her number. When she picked up, Marcus could hear the familiar warmth in her voice. "Marcus. I was just thinking about you," she said. "Hey, Mrs. Brooks," Marcus replied, his voice filled with excitement. "I wanted to tell you something. I got the job. The company offered me a full-time position. I'm going to be a junior data analyst." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a joyful laugh. "Marcus, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you. You did it." "I couldn't have done it without you," he said earnestly. "You were the one who always told me I could do it. You're the reason I kept going even when it seemed impossible. You were right all along. I just helped you see the truth that was already inside you," Mrs. Brooks responded softly. "You did all the hard work. You proved to everyone, including yourself, that you have what it takes." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat as he reflected on the journey that had led him to this point. All the years of doubt, the feeling that no one understood what he was capable of. But then, there had been her words. Those powerful words that planted the seed of belief when everything else seemed bleak. It had been her voice in his head when he wanted to give up, her encouragement when the weight of the world felt unbearable. "Thank you, Mrs. Brooks," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "You changed my life." She was silent for a moment, as if absorbing the gravity of his words. "Marcus, no. You changed your life. You did the work. I just pointed you in the right direction. I knew you had it in you." Marcus smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "I won't forget this. I promise." In the days that followed, Marcus settled into his new role at the company, learning quickly and impressing his colleagues with his problem-solving skills. But it wasn't just about the work, it was about the transformation he had undergone. Every challenge he faced now felt like an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to prove that the past had no hold on him anymore. He had built something new. A future that was his to shape. But despite all of the excitement and joy that came with this new chapter, there was one thing that stayed with him, the desire to give back, to help others in the way that Mrs. Brooks had helped him. He had been given an opportunity, one that he had worked for, and he wanted to ensure that others like him had the same chance. It was a thought that kept him awake at night. He knew that there were other students out there, just like he had been, struggling to see their own potential. They needed someone who would believe in them, who would challenge them to rise above the limitations they had been handed. And he knew that he could be that person for someone else. One afternoon, after a particularly successful meeting at work, Marcus decided to visit his old high school. He hadn't been back since his graduation, but something told him that now was the time. He wanted to see Mrs. Brooks, to thank her again and to share the news in person. But he also wanted to remind himself of where he had come from. The school's familiar scent of old books and polished floors greeted him as he stepped through the doors. It felt strange, in a way, to be back. So much had changed, yet so much had stayed the same. He walked down the hallways, remembering the days when he had been unsure of his place in the world. But now, everything felt different. He felt grounded, confident in who he was and what he had accomplished. When he reached Mrs. Brooks's classroom, he hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door. A soft voice called out from inside. "Come in." Marcus opened the door, and there she was, Mrs. Brooks, sitting at her desk, surrounded by papers and textbooks. When she saw him, her face broke into a warm smile. "Marcus," she exclaimed, standing up to greet him. "It's so good to see you." "Hi, Mrs. Brooks," he said, smiling back. "I just wanted to stop by and say thank you again. I got the job. I'm officially a junior data analyst now." Her eyes widened with pride. "Marcus, that's amazing. I knew you could do it. I'm so proud of you." "I couldn't have done it without you," he replied. "You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. You helped me see my potential when I was too scared to try." Mrs. Brooks placed a hand on his shoulder. "I just helped you unlock what was already inside you. You've always had this potential, Marcus. You've always had this strength. And now the world is finally seeing it too." As Marcus stood there in her classroom, surrounded by the echoes of his past, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He had been given a gift of belief, of encouragement, and of guidance. And now, it was his turn to pass that gift on. Walking away from the school that day, Marcus made a promise to himself. He would continue to push forward, to grow, and to never stop believing in his own potential. But he would also make sure that the next generation of students would have someone who believed in them, someone who would show them that they were capable of anything. Because, as Mrs. Brooks had shown him, sometimes all it takes is one person to change the trajectory of a life. And Marcus was determined to be that person for someone else. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?